Hi. Welcome back to #Harmonic Artificial Sound, a brightest side of us at Berg Mountain Optional University. This session we discuss scale in the Star-Spangled Banner and its symphony. Won't you come along with us?
Sixth accord A minor. Scale, the Star-Spangled Banner. Symphony. Music's purpose is to attract through artistic inspiration, for if it were to ward off, it wouldn't be music but dissonance in noise. Distinguishing noise and silence, we listen for notes to scales pitches which imply artificial manipulation of sound waves, whereas nature has yet to repeat #harmonic artificial sound in time as music has had. Of sound from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz ultrasonic inaudible to man, waves below are felt with greater amplitude. Symphonies are listened to, heard and felt, having a body of musicians amplified in play with ultrasonic, audible, and infrasonic, physical, sound. A distinct difference between vocal and instrumental music is that manipulated voice, trained like parrots, is still natural sound, but instruments are man-made manufacturing sound. Whether instruments attempt to mimic vocal cords or voice is trained to imitate lyres and the like. In time, somewhere in space to scales, we associate sounds with others to the same pitches, whereas man being a social being pulled like apples falling from trees to gravity, music accents adding density to speech, drawing man closer. As musical notes form fundamental frequencies, scales are distinguished in music, but, whereas bands are on one of 11 octaves, symphonies are so broken up into movements of different pitches. From stringed instruments to woodwinds, and from there to brass and percussion, symphonies can employ 100 musicians. An apex of #harmonic artificial sound. Like organized football games, symphonies are typically broken into 4 sections or movements, with the first following in sonata-allegro form and the second more lyrical. The third is a minuet and the final reverts to the first form, sonata-allegro. The Star-Spangled Banner, augustly played in symphony, was written in defense of Fort McHenry, painting liberty victorious, proven by a still yet waving tattered flag.
The Star-Spangled Banner is augustly played in symphony. September 14, 1814. Francis Scott Key, in the War of 1812, after the valiant defense of Fort McHenry, wrote the lyrics of a poem whose words would become our national anthems. As Washington had admitted Vermont and Kentucky at the time, the banner of 15 stars and an equally numbered stripes was commissioned before admittance of Tennessee on June 1 of 1796. Flag production wasn't what it is now, and like an expired driver's license, the fort was technically operating government illegally, but that's a story for another day. Battle of Baltimore inspired Key to write Defense of Fort McHenry. Though I was under the impression that it was sang to the melody of God Save the King, others promote that the anthem's background originates from John Stafford Smith, written for social club in London called the Anacreontic Society. The Anacreontic Society was a group of armature musicians derived from the 6th century BC poet whose work was all in the ancient Ionic dialect, ideally to a lyre. With better personalities being more popular than others, being political, they'd often hold instruments as if they could play, when they couldn't. To the tune of the Anacreontic song composed by Ralph Tomlinson or John Stafford Smith, Cheshire or Gloucester, for an 18th century society of the same name, the Star-Spangled Banner shares its melody. The song used first officially was by the Navy in 1931, 75 years after McHenry's defense. That year's 3rd of May, Herbert Hoover signed the song in a joint resolution into law as our anthem.
The Star-Spangled Banner was written praising the American defense of Fort McHenry by Key. In the war, the British were brutish, blockading American nautical commerce, but liberty for those British wouldn't be victorious at McHenrysburg. On a mission from Upper Marlborough, the seat of Prince George's County, Maryland, Francis Scott Key was sent to petition release for the captured and elderly William Beans. Key would travel to Baltimore after British burning Washington and raid Alexandria and take good old Dr. Beans. A prisoner of war since August 28 of 1814, Key was encouraged by townsfolk, where 4 days later, leaving home to a war zone to retrieve a revered man. Sanctioned by President Madison, Key reached Baltimore September 4, where from there on the 5th they set sail on the Patapsco River southwardly through Chesapeake Bay in search of Dr. Beans. Said to be aboard the HMS Tonnant, it would be located at Tangier Island, where Key would secure release from Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane and Major General Robert Ross over dinner that evening. Having learned of the planned attack on Baltimore, neither Beans nor Key were allowed leave until after the results, when he would compose the poem. I'd always thought it was to the less heard Long Live the King, though if some wish to say the tune is to the Anacreon in heaven, so be it. Having 4 stanzas most remember, and singing do so but the first.
The Star-Spangled Banner proved how united we stood for our country, as orchestras and symphonies proudly play. Standing for any flag meant sharing in its glory, but also a possibility of falling in defense of it too. The reward wasn't as sweet, but children today seldom know how hard earlier generations strived under the Star-Spangled Banner if we don't reiterate it to them. Singing the anthem reminds us of that bombardment which began at 6 o'clock anti-meridian on the morning of the 13th in September of 1814. From dusk to dusk, this 5-bastioned dry moat burg was built on the site of the previous Fort Whetstone by Jean Fontaine, a French architect, probably attacked for being a French building, as Whetstone is clearly English. As the bombardment ceased, the smoke cleared and the juggernaut retreated, preferring to live another day. Amerigons rejoiced, and Francis Scott Key, inspired, wrote The Defense of Fort McHenry, with lyrics that paint a picture of liberty under fire, whose unconquerable soul withstood a greater force, and head bloody it was triumphant and unbowed. The picture painted of liberty victorious is personified in those sing the song, and reminds us who we are, when, where and why is equally meant.
The Star-Spangled Banner, augustly played in Symphony, was written setting the scene of Fort McHenry in 1814, painting liberty victorious, proven by a still yet waving tattered flag. Whether by more or less, almost is not in love or war, and no one takes positions must defend them, if they can, where the empire wouldn't after battle, the flag yet waved over the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That concludes all the information for this time. Next we consider tempo in My Country 'Tis of Thee in concerto. We can't wait to see you there. Thank you for your time and consideration.